Ladies and gentlemen, today these are going to be the top 15 best loadout meta weapons in Modern Warfare Zombies. Look, a lot's changed since I made a last video. They've updated the game quite tremendously, and actually there's one item that got added pretty recently that completely changed everything about the meta. And what exactly is this item, you might be asking? Well, fellas, that would be Mags of Holding. This schematic has completely changed the gameplay loop and the way that weapons work. So essentially, when you're running this, your regular gun will now pull from its ammo stock instead of the magazine or the clip, and so this means you never have to reload. While this doesn't work on wonder weapons, all of the guns we are going to talk about could take advantage of Mags of Holding, and that also means that if you're running this schematic, you don't need any kind of magazine attachment, and taking one off will obviously reduce the weight of the weapon, making you move faster. So all of my builds in this list are going to be assuming you're using Mags of Holding, but if you're not, you can probably just run the biggest magazine for your weapon and get away just fine. But look, I get it. This can all seem a little complicated. It can feel a bit much, but this video is going to make things super simple and easy to understand and give you a bunch of effective weapons to use in Modern Warfare Zombies. I totally understand keeping up with the meta can be absolutely exhausting, but you know what doesn't have to be exhausting? Keeping your personal data and information on the internet secure. Private internet access is a very safe way to prevent your data from being stolen by dirty data brokers that literally buy and sell information about you. It's kind of scary how much of your data at any point is floating around and being traded by different companies. Private internet access is a VPN that will encrypt you and not only prevent sensitive data of yours from being taken, but can also give you access to region-locked content on streaming services. The VPN will make you appear as if you're in another country and can access these items on like Netflix or something. You can use it on as many devices as you want, and if you're anything like me, you know, you tend to bounce around from your phone to your computer all the time, and now you can be sure that both of them will be protected from grubby hacker hands. It's also useful for gaming, where you can enable the VPN and play on servers in different countries, or you can use it to try to get closer servers and reduce your ping in-game. By using my offer, you guys will get an 83% discount on private internet access, making it just $2.03 a month. Lads, that's like less than a chicken sandwich, plus 4 months completely free. So go check them out using the link in the description, and thank you to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video. Coming in at number 15, we have the F-Tac Siege. This is a handgun from Modern Warfare 2, actually, and it's one of the very few weapons from that game that are incredibly effective in MWZ. Now, every single weapon we talk about is going to have some pros and cons, some drawbacks, trade-offs, but also strengths. And the F-Tac Siege biggest strength to me is the fact that this is just an absolute bullet hose. That cannot be overstated. It's also worth mentioning, of course, everything on this list will be at its full potential when fully upgraded and, you know, legendary rarity, but still, the F-Tac Siege, no matter what you have it at, is still going to be very effective when pack-a-punched. And I'd say one of its biggest strengths is it cuts through crowds of zombies like butter. It's actually like so satisfying. However, it's not my favorite against boss zombies. I feel like the F-Tac Siege is a really good just jack-of-all-trades weapon. It's still very effective, don't get me wrong, but it's not the most specialized gun in the game, and the recoil can be a little hard to control. That's why I've set this build up for mostly hip firing, and so if you're aiming this one, you're going to have a bit of a hard time. The iron sights are pretty ugly, and it's just not really built for that. But the F-Tac Siege is still a fantastic weapon, and you can't go wrong with it. Coming up at number 14 is the ISO 45, and it's a bit of an odd one because it's been in the game for a while, but I'm only just now realizing how good it actually is. I will say it's not my favorite weapon for end game content. This is probably one of those weapons that is more suited for the regular map and all the contracts and activities. So that inspired me to go and fully upgrade it and really see its performance, and I was very impressed. I think the ISO 45 is great, similarly like the F-Tac Siege at dealing with lots of enemies at once, and it still does pretty good against single enemies too. It's okay against boss zombies, not the best. There are definitely more specialized builds on this, and you don't really have to worry about reload time, particularly if you're running Mags of Holding, but still, even if you're not, it's got a good reload time. It hits like an AR, but it plays a lot like an SMG, and that speed and versatility is really what's important in this game mode, so I like the ISO 45 a lot. Coming in at the number 13 spot is just a personal favorite of mine. This is the BAL 27. I'm going to be flat out and say that this is not the best gun in the game if you're looking for anything as far as damage goes or just overall effectiveness. It's good, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not top tier. I just happen to really like it. I think it's probably like, you know, upper mid tier, but it still belongs somewhere on this list because of what you can turn this into. This really does get better with attachments, and even though it doesn't have a particular conversion kit, it still becomes much more effective with the attachments that I put on it. Mags of Holding does great for this because the thing with the bow is it shoots faster over time. So obviously, if you're sustaining fire, you're going to get that maximum fire rate, and you can actually deal some pretty serious damage that way. Once again, this is definitely a jack of all trades weapon. It's not particularly the best at any one thing, but you can throw this in any situation in MWZ, and it's going to do pretty good. Coming up at number 12 is going to be the Sidewinder, which might be a bit of a surprise because it's quite rare for a weapon in this category to ever make a top 10 or top 15 list. It's just not very common you see one of these, but the Sidewinder is special because the vanilla version of it isn't so good. To be honest, like, it's a pretty average weapon, but it has a conversion kit that adds a drum mag and basically turns it into an LMG. And the thing is, obviously, with, like, you know, these like battle rifle rounds, it's going to be significantly more effective than, you know, something like a traditional LMG. Even though those are good, this is just going to be straight up better. The bullets hit like a truck, and it has the same attribute as the Mw3, where it begins to shoot faster the longer you sustain fire. That is absolutely broken in here, and it deals out insane damage. Now, admittedly, it's a bit situational. I found that it's not maybe the best option to use in every case. I really like it for certain things, you know, for fighting the actual worms, whether it be the Act 4 worm or the red worm, it's pretty good. But I mean, for regular enemies, it's a little bit overkill. Maybe it's not the best thing for that, but I just happen to really like it, but it does need that conversion kit. Our number 11 spot are going to be the dual Renettis. These have appeared on my list before. This is nothing new. They were a bit higher, I think, last time I ranked them, and they're still great, don't get me wrong. And especially removing the magazine attachment allows me to put other things on this to make this more mobile. Again, this is basically considering your running mags of holding, but if you're not, this still does okay with a large magazine. The thing I've noticed is taking off these big magazines on every gun, it allows you so much more movement speed and mobility that actually makes a big difference in stuff like endgame content, particularly with the dark ether and whatnot. It actually is pretty insane for that. So I think the dual Renettis are still a very viable option for just about anything you're going to play, and especially the endgame content. The only thing is it's not very good at range. You know, if you're trying to pinpoint some damage on a very specific faraway target, not so good for that. Obviously, dual wield weapons and hip fire, not so, you know, cut out for that situation, but anything up close dealing with multiple enemies, this thing dumps out damage. It's amazing. Coming in the number 10 spot is going to be the only sniper rifle on this list, but it's going to be the XRK Stalker. Yet another choice that has appeared on a list prior, and it's still one of the best guns in the game. The thing is, the XRK Stalker is good at one thing, that is damage. This thing hits like my ex-wife. It is crazy. It's obviously very cut out for one specific thing, and that's shooting boss zombies. It's a little bit overkill sometimes. Like, you can literally shoot HVTs through walls and it'll still one-shot them. When this thing is fully upgraded, it's kind of stupid. It feels a little bit unfair. Obviously, though, it has a big weakness, and that's the fact that you can't deal with tons of zombies at once with this thing. You cannot take this into like the dark ether and single-handedly use this weapon. You're gonna have to have something else for crowd control, either another regular gun or, you know, a wonder weapon, but you cannot really run this thing on its own and deal with all situations in the game. It's only good for bosses and HVTs, that's about it. Otherwise, I did have to put it on this list because it is all around an excellent weapon in that regard, though. Coming up just after that as our number 9 spot is the BAS-B. Honestly, battle rifles have a weird spot in the meta. They can either be really good or just really not so good. It's pretty much no in between. The BAS-B has been great for a while. I mean, ever since it's kind of in the game, and it's remained a dominant force ever since. And being able to take the magazine attachment off it and put other stuff has certainly helped. This does really well with mags of holding because, you know, it's one of those guns that has a smaller magazine theoretically, but has higher damage per bullet. And so if you don't have to worry about reloading, then you really get to see that benefit when it comes to something like this. I've personally found that this is the most fun build for me. This seems to work the best, and it's also one of those guns that I would say is a little more specialized, but it's still a pretty good all-around weapon. You can use it in endgame content, you can use it for bosses or just regular contracts. It's basically good wherever, but it does struggle in the fire rate department a little bit. When you're dealing with like tons of enemies in the dark ether segments, maybe not the best choice there. I think this is a very good starter weapon to introduce you to the mechanics of Modern Warfare Zombies if you haven't been already. It's just a good one to rank up and get a feel for, and it is a decent weapon overall for no matter what purposes. Coming in at the number 8 spot is the MCW, an assault rifle that has appeared on my rankings before, and it's a great weapon, and I would say this is the king of versatility. There's a lot of jack-of-all-trades weapons, but the MCW may be one of the best at that, and being able to take off the magazine attachment allowed me to put on the conversion kit instead, and I think I've been sold. I prefer the conversion kit get over to the, vanilla build of the gun. But to be honest with you, it doesn't feel like there's a ton of meaningful difference. Maybe there is a little bit, but it's quite marginal. But you can literally use this for just about anything. It's not going to melt bosses as quick as some other guns will, but you can use it anywhere. It has virtually no weaknesses to speak of, and especially with mags of holding, you never have to worry about reloading, so that becomes irrelevant. Very good fire rates, very good damage, and it's just a weapon that doesn't have any drawbacks, essentially. Coming in at the number 7 spot is the previous king of Modern Warfare Zombies, the tier handguns, essentially. These are still great. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to give the impression that these suck now, but they've gone through a series of nerfs, and the meta has changed quite significantly since then, and they're just not quite as effective as they used to be. The biggest thing holding it back is actually its magazine, and again, mags of holding completely changes the functionality of this weapon to where it does become a machine again. I would even say it's probably top 3, and dare I say it, maybe still the best gun in the game if you're using mags of holding. I don't know, that's a bit of a stretch, but the point is, it still hits like tequila on an empty stomach, and I would say its biggest drawback is the fact that it's just a little clunky. It's not great at dealing with hordes of enemies either, and obviously it has next to no range, so it's got some pretty big drawbacks. Like, I know we all loved the tier, especially when the game came out. It was easily like the best weapon, but it does have its flaws, and those cannot be overlooked, so it needs to be paired with something that's more fitted for crowd control, because the tier simply can't do it on their own anymore. I mean, really. But you can deal with bosses, and it's still going to absolutely shred them. There's no doubt about that. Coming in at the number 6 spot is maybe one of the weirdest guns on this list. It's a quite unassuming weapon that without prior knowledge you wouldn't look twice at. This is the Core 45 pistol. It's a pretty recently added gun, and the thing that makes this special is actually its conversion kit. So when you apply this conversion kit, it basically gives you a binary trigger, which means that you will fire a bullet every time you press your trigger button in and out. So every time you click your trigger once, it will actually shoot 2 bullets for the in and off switch. I know that's a little bit confusing, but basically you're firing 2 bullets per tap. And that can definitely work, especially, if you have a good trigger finger. I would say the biggest drawback to this weapon is that it's just kind of awkward to use, and not that you can't do it, but it feels very different to every other Call of Duty gun in this game just because of how weird the binary trigger is. But if you can use this build and get used to that weird mechanic, the Core 45 actually has incredibly high DPS. The damage is pretty insane, and you can deal with boss enemies, you can deal with HVTs. Again, not an amazing crowd control weapon, to be fair, so you might want to pair it with something that is more suited for that, but the Core 45 does great for maybe your primary damage dealer. It may not look like it, but this thing definitely has some power behind it, and I've become a big fan over the last couple weeks I've been playing with it. Coming in at number 5, we have the Rival 9 with the aftermarket part. So I'm a little bit torn on this one. I've been using the Rival 9 with and without its conversion kit, because essentially applying the conversion kit makes it into this 3-round burst, sort of almost AR hybrid. It's very odd. It's not a traditional weapon by any means, and I like the way that the normal SMG feels, but this does add damage onto it, and it does seem to be pretty effective for certain situations in zombies. I feel like when it comes to running the conversion kit, it depends on what you're using it for. Shooting tons of enemies, it's probably better to run the unconversioned kit version of it, but if you're shooting bosses, it might be better to use the extra damage and have a bit of a more awkward fire rate, but deal consistent damage instead. It's kind of just a pick and choose thing. This is the build that I have, and you can copy it if you want, or you can go back to the non-conversion kit. It'll probably serve you just fine, but it's a little bit of a strange one. Anyways, moving on to our number 4 spot is another previous high tier. This is the SVA 545. So I don't know if they did this recently, but it doesn't seem like you can put this in single fire anymore in zombies, at least as far as I'm aware. But what you are able to do is add the flamethrower attachment. Now, I understand the flamethrower got nerfed recently, but that was really only against boss enemies, and as we've stated, there are plenty of other builds and weapons that deal with bosses just fine, so don't worry about that. The flamethrower on this weapon is still worth running, because not only is the SVA just godly on its own, but the flamethrower cuts through them like literal butter. It's still probably one of the most effective attachments ever to be created, and the gun itself is good enough to run, but the flamethrower for dealing with regular enemies is still insane. Obviously, bosses, maybe not so much anymore, but you keep that in mind. You can still deal with tons of situations with this flamethrower, and it's it's very, very easy to use. The only drawback is that the flamethrower doesn't have a ton of range, but the actual gun can make up for that, and so it doesn't really have a whole lot of weaknesses, and I would say it's very effective. Coming in at the number 3 spot, getting into our best weapons in the game, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised that we have the WSP Swarm. I mean, depending on who you ask, this could be the best gun in the game, and I think it's certainly a contender. The Swarm is obviously a very good pick because you don't really need to aim with this weapon, and any gun with a conversion kit that allows you to dual wield or have it akimbo is automatically going to be a contender for at least top 10 in the whole game. So the Swarms have obviously been meta. The hipfire is amazing. It deals with not only tons of enemies, but can also shred bosses. Like, it doesn't have any drawbacks. Only minor thing is that it's not very accurate at range, but that quite literally doesn't matter when the rest of the weapon is this good. Of course, the WSP Swarm has been probably one of the most dominant guns in the whole game, but I think building it like this now, especially if you have mags of holding, is going to be where it's the most optimal, because previously I would say its weakness was it was a little slow. Like, it made your movement speed a little bit clunky, but removing that big old magazine, you actually have a lot more movement speed and freedom now, and it just feels a lot better to use. But again, mags of holding completely changes the gun, and would definitely recommend for this particular gun. Now, coming in at the number 2 spot, we have a brand new SMG, and one that I just fell in love with. It's the FJX Horus. I could go on for days about this gun. I mean, getting it just in its vanilla version with no attachments, it's pretty shocking how good it is. Great ADS speed, great damage, and surprisingly good range. I don't really understand how it has all of these strengths and virtually no weaknesses. You cannot dual wield this one, but it doesn't matter, because regardless, this thing still just absolutely out damage. Like, dude, this gun just doesn't feel real. Like, it feels like it belongs in another game. It makes a lot of the end game content a joke, and so I'm just gonna say this up front: if you still want a challenge when you're playing some of the Dark Ether rifts and whatnot, the FGX Horus might end up making it feel a bit too easy. I think it's kind of like, at this point, it's safe to say that it's pretty OP, and this build definitely extenuates its strengths to the nth degree. So I would say that's easily on my number 2 spot. Now, before we unveil our number 1 weapon, I do want to give a quick honorable mention to the Ram 7. Not that it's the greatest gun or doesn't really beat out a whole lot on this list, but it is still pretty high tier, I would say, and it's just also really good and fun to use as well. I just really like it for some reason. It's like that cool homie that you meet at a party one time and you're like, damn, he was like cool to hang out with, but you just literally never see him again. It's fine, you probably won't use it a whole lot, but if you need a gun that, you're bored of everything else, give the Ram 7 a try, because I really do enjoy playing with it. I think it's actually pretty solid. So anyways, coming in at our number 1 spot is going to be the WSP Stinger. I feel like this is it. I think I discovered the holy grail of the meta. This is it for Modern Warfare Zombies, and the reason for that is with this attachment build, you not only get the insane damage that these absolutely dump out, but you also, by removing the magazine attachment, you get increased movement speed. So this whole build I would recommend copying, and when using mags of holding, you are playing a different game. When using the Stingers with mags of holding, it feels like you're playing Doom. You're quite literally almost at a sprinting movement speed just by walking and being able to hip fire. I will never go back to using like a big old heavy gun again, especially in endgame content, because it just doesn't compete. You get the damage of a really heavy weapon, the mobility equivalent of carrying only a plastic fork. It's incredible, dude. I will never go back, and I think the Stingers are probably what's at the top of the mountain for Modern Warfare Zombies, and I think will remain the number 1 best gun for the entire meta. I know MWZ has more or less wrapped up its updates right now, so I think this is going to be where it ends for the Stingers. I think they're going to be on top of the mountain the rest of the way through. So I hope these builds did help. Before you guys go, I do have a Call of Duty podcast that I run with my wonderful co-host T-Dog. If you guys haven't checked it out, it'll be linked in the description if you want to hear us yap about Call of Duty. Go give it a listen, and thank you so much, guys. But anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.